Well, welcome to a challenging day. I was out hunting yesterday and lost a front bearing in this machine. I suspect that the bearing, it's an inside bearing, is probably the hardest one to change on the whole machine. And I suspect that it was caused by the last outing I had a bolt come off, fall down in the pan. It was picked up by the chain, ran through a sprocket and busted the chain. And I suspect when that happened, it probably, in the space in between the chain and the sprocket, I bet you that it flexed that bearing, and that's what it compromised the bearing. When we first went out on this last trip, you could tell, I could hear a squeaking like a bearing, and I thought, well, I know I've greased everything, and I'll bet that's what it was. So we're gonna go ahead and get into this. I got a couple other little things to fix on this, but the main thing to do is the bearing. To do that, I'm gonna have to take the tracks off, so that I can take the tire off, so that I can take the axle out to get to the bearing. So it's going to be a bit of a project. And before I start that, I'm going to go ahead and wash it off really good so I don't have as much mud and things like that on it. And while I'm at it, I'll service it. Tire is pointing inward, and when you look here, that front shaft is going kind of at an angle, and it's because that inside bearing is blown out. And so I'm going to have to take that chain off, and then once the chain's off, then I can take that bearing out. So you can see I've taken the chain off there. You can see the sprocket right there. That was kind of bare to get out, and you can see there's no bearing inside of that thing. So I'm going to take these bolts here off so I can pull this outer one out. So you can see that goes into here. We've got a bearing behind that. And then the seal that goes to the tub, and then the outer part here. And we're going to take a look at that sprocket. See if we're missing any teeth or anything's goofed up with that sprocket. And it looks pretty good. So I'm happy about that. Now what I need to do is get the bearing housing out of there. And that's on the inside there. That shouldn't really be too tough now that everything's out of the way. You can see there's a piece laying up in there. Let's see what that is. Oh, there's part of the bearing from the inside. There must be the other half of it up in there, so we'll dig around. I've taken the chain out of there. I have the front bearing holder out. This chain, when the axle got screwed up, the chain, I think, got messed up. This tire got something in between the tire and the bead, and this went flat. I got everything in the parts washer here. And I don't want this gasket to get grease all over it, so I'm gonna take the gasket out to start with. And these go on the end of this with this bolt here. And leave that to soak. And a guy could put this back on there without cleaning it up this nice, but this does make putting it on a lot easier. And then it's kind of done right. You know where you're starting at, instead of having a bunch of crusty old grease on there and stuff like that. And then you're fighting and stuff like that. This just makes it easier. And see, this ends up being trapped in the tub and see how that fits right through there, and so the bearing fits inside of that. So when it goes on the machine, these two things clamp the bearing there. The sprocket goes on the shaft like that, and then this bearing holder goes back here, and there's a bearing that goes on there, and this goes in there, and it holds it on the machine. So this is a 4 metric. I'm here to tell you right now that there's no way I'm gonna get lucky enough that this just slides off. Nope. Okay, so we'll mess with that in a bit. In the meantime, I'm going to get all the rest of this clean without too much effort. I was able to loosen this up. Well, I can go that far. So what I did was I pounded this on there and held the bearing and just pushed it on the floor, and so I think I'm going to go ahead and do that and see if I can get the bearing the rest of the way off. So I got the axle turned upside down in here. You can see there's the bottom of it there. I got it up there, and this is a hydraulic press, and I'm just going to press that out of there. So we're back in business, pumping it out. Okay, if you look at the end of that, you can see that it goes up and down. It's got a wonky in it. Starting there, going that way. So I'm going to have to buy a whole new axle now. We're going to start by putting the interior bearing in. So this is the interior bearing that will go on the end of the shaft on the inside of the machine. And you can see here, the zerk, grease goes in the zerk, comes out here. So when I put this bearing in, I want to, and so in this bearing you can see right here, there's a grease port so that grease can get in the bearing. So I want to make sure that I line that port up with the zerk. And so when I put this on there and it clamps down, it holds that exterior portion of the bearing where the port is, so the port's lined up with the grease zerk, so we get grease going directly in the bearing. Okay, so you can see the shiny thing there, that's the back of the bearing. Okay, so I got that put in, and it looks like on here there's a set screw hole right in there. And this is going to be for the sprocket. So this is a grease port for this one, and so I want to make sure that I have that straight up, because there's the zerk here, and I want that to be lined up. And what I've done is this shaft has flat spots on it here, and so I'm going to go ahead and tighten this one up, and even though I don't know how deep it has to go, I'm going to tighten this up, and then once I put this in there and I put the axle bolt in the end of it and start pulling it, it will actually slide on there. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So first I'm going to take this out. And it's greasy right now, so I'm going to hit it with some brake cleaner because I want it to be clean. And do the same thing to the other one. Because the reason I want this to be so clean is I'm going to put Loctite on this, and I want it to start with a really clean surface so it'll get good adhesion. Okay, we're going to let that dry. Okay, so you can see the flat spot there, and I want this to go down and be on the beginning of that flat spot. Almost there. Okay, so now it's on the flat spot. Okay, now I'm going to put Loctite on these. And this is the blue Loctite, which is supposed to be able to come back off. I'm gonna look in there and see if I can see the flat spot. And I'm gonna put one in here even though there's not a flat spot there. Okay, so what should happen here, so I'm going to want that on there. And realistically, I'm just going to put it onto here. It's going to be the easiest. I want to make sure that my grease port now is straight up. Right there, let's see if that is. Yep, that's a grease port. And so I want the grease port straight up so when I put it in there, it'll line up with this zerk on the top here. And for right now, I'm only going to put it in that far because I got to put the sprocket on it on the inside. So I've already forgot something. Now we're going to go ahead and get this sprocket ready to go. You can see the end of the shaft coming through there, and so I'm going to try to put the sprocket on it. Slides into that bearing. So I'm putting this outside flange on. Okay, so you can see that that needs to be pulled in just a little bit further, and so we'll do that with the bolt. Okay, so we got blue Loctite on there, and I'm going to go ahead and put that bolt into the end of the axle and tighten that down. So you can see that that sucked that all the way in there tight up against there, and the sprocket's about lined up. And so now here's one of the tricks about that sprocket. This is to keep that from turning. The inside bearing has 2 set screws on it, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten those up. Okay, so I got my vice grips locked onto one side of the chain. I'm going to put the connecting link in there. So you can see I got the chain on, the axle there, obviously the bearings are on, so that is ready to go. And then I also got it so that you can see that the grease hole is top center, and here it is top center as well, and so I'll be able to grease them all at the same time. So I'm out of grease in my grease gun, because you always run out of grease when you're in the middle of a job. That's just how it always works. And this is marine grease. Okay, it's working. So the nice thing about this, when I line those holes up when the tire's on there, you can stick this through the rim, through the hub, and right onto the zerk. Okay, so on these axle bolts, this axle bolt pulls the axle back, and I'm going to take these out and clean them up with brake clean as well, and shoot brake clean in here and get those clean and Loctite those in there. I feel like they haven't done as well as they should, so I'm going to take that precaution. Okay, so I put Loctite on all of these axle bolts and got them nice and tight, and so hopefully I won't have any of those back.